Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Bible study. As we continue our journey through the book of Mark, we find ourselves in the 12th chapter. We kicked it off last week, looking at verses 1 to 12, and I pray that you enjoyed that kind of incredible truth that Jesus drew out of the parable, really kind of smacking the Pharisees and the Sadducees kind of right in the face, having them to deal with it. So what we'll find ourselves tonight as we're in this study, we find ourselves just a few days before Jesus is going to be crucified and raised from the dead. It's actually still Tuesday as we're progressing through that Holy Week. And what we're going to see tonight is the intensity of the questioning between the religious leaders and Jesus. What happens? It continues to increase. We're only looking at a couple of verses tonight, but don't let the length of the text fool you, because there's a whole lot that is happening here. So I'm going to just read, we're just covering verses 13 to 17 tonight. So I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it from the Tree of Life version. All my notes are prepared from the New King James, but I'm just really enjoying my Tree of Life version. So I'm going to read it from that portion. And let me go to it. And really it says, Then they send some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Yeshua in order to trap him with a word. They come and say to him, "Teacher, we know that you are honest, and what others think doesn't concern you. You don't look at men's appearance, but you teach the way of God according to the truth. Is it permitted to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" But Yeshua saw through their hypocrisy and said to them, "Why are you testing me? Bring me a denarius so I might see it." And they brought one, and he said to them, "Whose image is this? And whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they said to him. Then Yeshua said to them, "Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and give to God the things that are God's." And they were completely amazed at him. So we got to understand that tonight, really, our teaching, it picks up on part 2 of a conversation that Jesus had in the temple. Now it's with another set of religious leaders. And you would actually think, after what they saw, what happened to the last group of leaders, how they really suffered this public humiliation, and they walked away embarrassed by Jesus' response, they probably would have hung up their attempts and really kind of went away with their tail between their legs. But however, that's not the case, right? That's not the case for the Sanhedrin group of members, because they actually couldn't afford their pride to be crushed. They couldn't afford for them to be made a fool of in front of everybody. So in response to their embarrassment, the text tells us in verse 13, they send some of the Pharisees and Herodians to what? To try to trap Jesus in a statement. And that word trap in the Greek is this word agrivo, which means to catch something that is unaware, like that of a wild animal. So the intent of these leaders was to trap Jesus as if he were some type of wild animal that was unaware and what was going down. And so where Mark's gospel tells us who was sent by this group of Sanhedrin's officials, Matthew's account mentions that the Pharisees sent their disciples, and Luke's account mentions that spies were sent. So with these varied accounts, it shows us the intent of the religious leaders, right? Flat out. It shows us the intent of their hearts. That by providing maybe unfamiliar faces, they assumed that their line of questioning would be able to trip Jesus up on his statements. And what we find in those in whom they send, they've been well coached in an effort to try to poke holes in Jesus' ministry, in his authority, and in his teaching. And I think before we get there, we have to acknowledge the two groups that have been sent to entrap Jesus. We know that they are disciples of the Pharisees and the Herodians. So if there were two groups of people who despise being in the same space with one another, it would have been these two groups of people, right? They didn't like each other. Calling them friends would be an understatement. But in this case, right, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, is a perfect way to describe this unlikely pairing between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the reason being is that the Herodians were a minor, non-religious political party composed of supporters of Herod and Rome, whereas the Pharisees, they desired complete independence and autonomy for Israel from Gentile oppressors, the Roman government, right? So for the Herodians and the Pharisees, for those two parties to have been together and found common ground on their shared opposition of which is Jesus, speaks to the fact that prior conversations were had and compromises made to actually gain each party's self-interest. And indeed, as a thorough plan was developed, because the question that is asked of the groups is unity, was one that included an interest of both parties in a way, right? The question that we are going to examine speaks to both the religious and actual political implications of the day. And Jesus is going to have to address both while at the same time refrain from causing a civil uproar and religious unrest amongst the crowds. And so if we notice how these two opposing groups approach Jesus, they begin by lavishing Jesus with these true theological compliments of who he is, right? Despite their true intent of sarcasm and hypocrisy. Think about it. I can only imagine how much saying those words to Jesus, how it pained them. That, I really got to say this, but I got to kind of butter them up, right? And so let me read it again in verse 14. They came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are honest, and what others think doesn't concern you. You don't look at men's appearance, but teach the way of God according to the truth." Right? Is it permitted to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So this attempt really to appeal to Jesus's moral, ethical uprightness as a means of flattery was a far reach for these guys. Man, they really milked the moment. It's almost like if you have kids, when your kids try to tell you that, you know what, you're the best parent, I'm so thankful, all the while they have an end game in mind. They're trying to get that new toy or permission to do such and such. And if you aren't really picking up what they're trying to put down, you might be fully exposed in the question that they asked after this false flattery, right? That way you've got to butter them up. They asked Jesus, is it lawful? Is it lawful to pay tax to Caesar or not? And I think that question right there drips of red flags when you truly consider who's asking the question. And we got to, as we mentioned earlier, the two groups posing the question are the Pharisees' disciples and the Herodians. And we got to mention that because the Pharisees objected the poll tax, the tribute taxes placed upon them by Rome due to their desire to be independent from them. The Pharisees had no desire to pay a tribute tax to Rome, yet by default, they grudgingly submitted the way some people do today, right? Yet all the while they submit to this line of questioning, all for the sake of justifying their end goal. And what was that? Trapping Jesus. Similarly, the Herodians supported foreign rule through the means of taxation, since the house of Herod was dependent upon the Romans. So what we have up to this point, according to the religious leaders' point of view, is a no-win situation for Jesus. So the question becomes, how would their line of questioning be deemed as a lose-lose situation for Jesus? Think about it. If Jesus tells the Pharisees, yes, it's lawful to pay Caesar a toll tax, it will raise issues amongst the following crowds, causing him to lose popularity with the people, and therefore, in their eyes, discredit him as a king. And for the Pharisees, despise the idea of having to pay taxes to a foreign and godless government. And if he says no, right, if it's not lawful to pay Caesar his tax, it would unleash retaliation against the government of Rome. And in response to the opposition, the Herodians would arrest Jesus for his rebellion against the state. But we've got to see something. This false flattery mixed with a question of entrapment was not hidden from the sights of Jesus. Why? Because he knows, right? He knows. Jesus knew their hidden agenda and their darkened hearts, and he calls out their hypocrisy in verse 15. And the word for Greek in hypocrisy in verse 15 is hypokrisis, which speaks to one's ability to act or to, I love this, to be two-faced, right? To be two-faced. They come across one way seeming to be with, hey, I've got the best intentions, yet underneath their mask of pleasantries is deceit and at the core, evil intent. And the way in which Jesus calls out their hypocrisy by asking really a rhetorical question, why are you testing me? Why are you testing me? In this sense of testing, it's kind of very closely related to what Satan attempted to do in Mark 1:13 when he was led into the wilderness, right? To test Jesus regarding the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. But in all three instances, we know that Jesus demonstrated why he was perfect and in all rights. And this situation is not going to be any different. So Jesus, he kind of presses this moment even further by requesting that they actually bring him a denarius to look at it. And he's going to do this as a means of an illustration. He's going to show them. So what was a denarius? A denarius was a Roman coin, which was equivalent to actually a day's wages. And so it happened that a denarius was the only coin acceptable for imperial tax payments. And within Palestine, the coin embossed with the image of the Roman emperor was deemed offensive to the Jewish people. It was so offensive, right, that within the Galilee, Herod Antipas avoided actually using this coin. But the leaders, more than likely the Herodians, brought about a denarius with Caesar's appearance on it for Jesus to inspect. Right? Maybe they brought it from the table of the money changers. As one can imagine, Jesus holds up the coin in the crowd with the Pharisees and the Herodians in plain view and says, whose likeness and inscription is this? And potentially with kind of this anticipation, lean in of hopes of trying to trip Jesus up, they tell him, well, hey, Caesar's likeness is upon the coin. And here is their opportunity in trapping Jesus with an image of Caesar as king upon the coin. The question from the leaders now becomes, how's he going to respond, right? How will he respond? And what makes this kind of moment that even more daunting is the inscription upon the coin itself. And this is what the inscription would have said. The front of it would have read, Tiberius Caesar, son of divine Augustus, supreme commander for the 8th time. That's what would have been on the coin. And on the reverse side read Pontifex Maximus, which renders high priest. And so the emperor was deemed both superior political ruler of the Roman Empire as well as the supreme religious leader. He was actually seen as a god. And to further press the point of idolatry and arrogance of Rome, Tiberius's adopted father, Octavius Augustus, was not a name but simply a title. The title August one was a religious title meaning one who possessed transcendent majesty. So the Pharisees and Herodians were anticipating that Jesus would pronounce himself as the divine one. And for that response, what would have happened would have triggered the Pharisees deeming the statement to be an act of idolatry. But Jesus responds in a very unexpected way. Jesus answers them in the first half of his answer by saying, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's." And that word render in the Greek means to pay back, to give back, or to return in the sense of obligation or rightful duty. The taxes which were to be paid was a debt owed to the state, Rome, because of the provision of the state, just the way that you and I pay taxes today. So without hesitation, Jesus, what's he say? Give to Caesar what belongs to him. And here Jesus makes known that the institution of human government is one that is to be obeyed and to submitted to accordingly, but ultimately because it has been established by God himself, right? The very famous portion of Scripture when it comes to government, right, is in Romans chapter 13, in Romans chapter 12. Render all to Romans 13:7 says, render to all what is due to them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whose customs is due, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. So in the same way as believers today, we are to obey governing leaders, for God has established them for his purposes. Again, it doesn't mean we follow blindly. If they are leading us to do something against God's will, design, and desire, then you know what? We have the obligation to stand up and say, no, that is not acceptable, and I am not going there. But we understand that at the end of the day, those whom are placed in office, whether it is we voted for them or not, are ultimately, they are under the sovereign control of God. Whether the politicians' motives are pure or not, there is nothing that is outside God's providential reach or his sovereign control, right? God uses everything. So as Jesus establishes the legitimization of human government at the very same time, he disassociates himself with any means of political or social anarchy, such as zealots. And kind of in a very coded way, establishes his divine authority in the latter half of his response. And the way in which he does this is through an interesting wordplay, a wordplay off of the very coin he is holding. Remember the question that he's asked regarding denarius. He asked, whose likeness and inscription is this? So the way in which Caesar's image on the coin revealed who owned it, Jesus now makes a jaw-dropping statement that will captivate the attention of the crowd, including the spies who have come to trip him up. It's at the end of Jesus' prior statement, render to Caesar what is Caesar, that he continues by saying this, and give to God the things that are God's. And so the question becomes, what was the point? What was Jesus' point in mentioning the last half of the statement? Why did he say that? In the same way that Caesar's image was embedded on the coin and the people were obligated to pay what was rightfully due to Caesar in a governmental sense, how much more should those created in God's image give themselves to their very being to God in actually full surrender? But we'll expound on that just a little bit later. I think we got to consider how clever and how precise Jesus's answers were, right? these men came to trip him up. They want to kill him. And Jesus retorts, man, with this perfect response. And as we mentioned earlier, Jesus doesn't speak partially, but truthfully, right? Just as the disciples of the Pharisees and the Herodians noted in their sarcastic sentiments in their introduction to him. Therefore, this answer satisfies the Herodians because the tax will be paid according to the state requirement for the tribute tax, since the Jewish people, they were under Roman rule. And the answer would also satisfy the Pharisees because no sacrifice was given to Caesar other than that which belonged to him. And Jesus makes it clear, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. And how was this accomplished practically within context of the text we're looking at tonight? Where the religious leaders are asking the question regarding their obligation to the state, Jesus raises the bar, as only he can, by speaking to the fact that they are withholding their obligations from God. And what's it come down to? Our lives are not our own, right? They're not our own. The very breath in our bodies has been graciously given to us, and yet so many walk around as if they are their own source of life. And then rather than submitting ourselves and surrendering to God and his truth, what do? We hijack the grace that has been freely given in the exchange for further judgment that will be piled upon us through his wrath. Selfishness and self-righteousness, they actually only lead to greater suffering in the end. For in the same way that the full weight of the state is held against us in our disobedience to paying taxes, where we're going to pay a very high price for that, right? So will the full weight of the wrath of God be unleashed upon those who constantly reject God's truth. And this becomes the point of Jesus' response to the men. They would rather debate and argue about what they were grudgingly obligated to in the sense of this temporary rule than benefit from the one who offers the blessings of the kingdom to come. And I think here is yet another opportunity disregarded by these leaders because of the unbelief and their hardened hearts. And these matters, these were the matters of things eternal versus temporal. They're weighty matters, right? They are weighty matters. For Caesar's empire has a beginning point, and guess what? It has an ending point. But God's kingdom has no end. It's eternal. And really, if we were to kind of boil down Jesus' point to one sentence, it would be this: obey God's word and his truth and prioritize it over all, above everything. Where the Pharisees had presented the poll taxes either as an either-or situation, Jesus presented it as a both-and. That although believers are citizens of a coming kingdom, we actually still hold residence within an existing kingdom, and we are to abide by those laws that have been placed over us in a righteous way. And again, if you read Romans 13, right? 13, 1 and 2, this became very popular during the whole COVID movement, right? Well, government is saying this. Government doesn't want you meeting. Government doesn't want you worshiping together. Government doesn't want you singing. And so you can just kind of hum the hymns and so there is that line, right? There is the line that at times that, okay, government is telling me to do something that is against God's word, I'm going to draw the line there. But here's what it says, Romans 13. Every person is to be subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they have opposed, will receive condemnation upon themselves. And I think as believers, right, we can find ourselves wanting to push against the demands of government. Yet we find here that Jesus, that there is portions that, hey, that yeah, we got to pay our taxes. We got to obey some of the laws and the rules and the regulations there. The only exception to this rule is when government's demands come in direct opposition to God's word. Then we no longer, right? It's in that moment when we are positioned to go against the government, right? And that's not like we go out looking for opportunities to do that. If that's our heart and our mindset, then we're just like the Pharisees. And I believe what we see here is the importance of submission versus the lack of it, right? That when we are submitted to the true and living King, our ability to willingly to submit is motivated not from government, but it's motivated from our submission to him, because we know who holds the true authority. Justin Trudeau doesn't hold the true authority, right? Jesus holds the true authority. And the Apostle Paul points out in Romans 12:1 that our dutiful obligation is to God, and our priority is to obey his word, is to worship him well and live acceptably and pleasing in his sight by daily dying to ourselves. Not dying to government, not dying to our leaders. No, dying to ourselves and living for Christ. And we can see how culture is informing the state, and laws more and more, right, may feel as though our ability to speak out on these matters gets more restricted. And we see that happening in our ability to speak truth now, right? When we stand up and say, no, there are only two genders. No, love is not love, right? No, a marriage is one man and one woman. No, God did not make them in the wrong body. When we stand up and say things like that, that goes right against, right, what the narrative that culture is speaking, the narrative that the enemy is getting a culture to buy into and believe, it is getting harder and harder to begin to speak those truths, because they are going to be costly. And I think it's just going to get more restricted because the enemy is working really, really hard. And so our job is to daily point people to Christ, not in our blatant disobedience because we want to say, stick it to the government. No. We honor government, and we pray for our government, and we pray for our leaders, right? We honor those who are in government over us. So you know what I do? As hard as it is, I pray for our leaders. I pray for Justin Trudeau. I pray that God's going to get a hold of his heart. I pray he's going to lead from a place of his namesake, that justice, right? Justice for everybody, justice for our country, that he's going to have his will submitted to God, that he's going to have a radical encounter with Jesus that's going to change him. Right? I pray for him. I don't respect him. I can honestly say that, because respect is something that you got to earn, and he's not earned my respect. He has not earned my respect, but I still have to honor the position by praying for him and holding him up before God. And I do that. And I do that for all of my political leaders, the ones that I agree with and the ones that I don't agree with. Because you know what? They're there because God has allowed them to be there. And so I'm going to pray that God is going to use them, that their hearts are going to be turned to God. And so just an amazing portion of Scripture where Jesus leaves the Pharisees and Herodians speechless. Right? Think about this desire of these two despised groups coming together to entrap, to kind of get Jesus to say something so they can kill him right then and there. And he just leaves them walking away saying, oh my goodness, that was brilliant, as only Jesus can do. So that's our text for today. I hope you enjoyed it and you dig into it. And Jesus, we're thankful for your word. Again, it's amazing, it's living, it's active, and it's sharper than any two-edged sword. And we know it pierces right to the very core of who we are. God, we pray your word will continue to come alive in our hearts, that we embrace it and we say yes to it. God, that we're going to live, number one, honoring you, submitted and surrendering to you, first and foremost, loving you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and dying to ourselves daily. God, and we're not going to blatantly kind of disregard rules and regulations, but God, give us the wisdom, God, that we know when to submit and we know when to say, no, enough is enough, and to speak up and to let our voice be heard into the issues that are so pressing in our day and age, that forgive the church for being silent all too often and not letting our voice be heard because we don't want to ruffle the waters. God, we know that you just spoke truth to every situation and circumstances, regardless of what was going to happen. And God, we want to be like that. We want to live a life submitted and surrendered to you and following you and leading and pointing people to you in every situation and circumstance. So Jesus, help us to be that today. And we just ask for your blessing, God, and that your word would continue to come alive in our hearts. In your wonderful name. And everybody said, amen. Well, bless you guys. Hopefully we'll see you out at church tomorrow night. We're diving back into the book of Revelation, picking up at chapter 15. Again, we're in the final stages, and we're entering the second half of the tribulation. It's going to be really great and eye-opening. The final bowl judgments are going to be poured out, and it's pretty intense. Bless you guys, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.